Shadow Star by Chris Claremont. Story by George Lucas. Thorn Drumheller stood in the heart of glory, yet all about him was desolation. The air was still. To Thorn, it was as if all life, all vitality, had been torn from it. Here was nothing. So simple a word, nothing. Thorn never imagined it could be so terrible. The sand beneath his feet had sparkled before, grains scattered thick with shards of crystalline fire that glittered like embers. The same held for the rock of the escarpment that ringed the Caledra, this ancient and huge bowl of a volcano. The crater was more than Thorn could grasp. He simply didn't know numbers big enough. There had been fire in that stone, pulsing fiercely. Now, nothing. Atop every summit of the promontory had stood a dragon. The memory sent chills along Thorn's spine. He was a Nelwyn, born to a race of lesser faerie, whose role in the world was as modest as their stature. For most of his days, he'd been a simple farmer. He had a wife he loved, 2 children he adored, and believed himself content. Dragons were the stuff of legends, and that had no truck with Nelwyns. Until one came to him 15 years ago in the dead of night, in what he thought was no more than a dream, to set his feet upon the path that brought him to this place. Here was where the dragons lived. Here, according to the stories of the 12 great realms, was the home of creation, and the dragons its embodiment. Only the dragons were no more. Thorn had seen them slain, and now the killer was walking straight toward him. She didn't look the part. Her skirt and top were dyed a scarlet so dark it seemed almost black, the colour of night-washed blood, spilled in passion. There was pride to Elora Dannon's step as she approached. Her look of joy had Thorn questioning if she was mad, or he was instead. By his side, Corey Bannerfin stirred, the timbre of each breath making plain how badly she was hurt. They had come to this hallowed ground, the princess, the warrior, the mage, to save the dragons from a sorcerer who'd sought to claim their power for his own, and through it dominion over all the realms, who'd set himself as Elora's enemy from her birth. In that, they had succeeded. The deceiver had been driven from the field without prize. But to Thorn, the terrible cost had made their struggle and sacrifice a mockery. The battle was won, but in consequence perhaps, all the world lost. "Elora Dannon!" he called in a hoarse cry. "What have you done?" "What was necessary," she replied. "You killed them! You killed them all!" "It was that, Drumheller, or let the deceiver claim their souls and power." "You were born to be saviour of our world. Why is it all you do is harm?" She blinked. In the whole catalogue of responses Thorn expected to this indictment, there was no listing for tears. They came suddenly, a stark reminder of just how young the sacred princess was, far more girl than woman still. "You're hurt, both of you," Elora said quietly. "Let me help." "Works for me," Corey said before Thorn could speak. Elora knelt beside Corey, moving gentle hands across her body to determine the scale of her injuries. Corey and their foe had gone toe-to-toe in single combat. It was no duel of finesse or elegance. Neither gave the slightest ground. The one found wanting would be the one to fall. It should have been the deceiver, but he could not be killed, could not even be harmed with his own weapons. Thorn's similar failure had left Elora alone to face him. The dragons cheered her as their champion. Then, by her hand, they died. Thorn hobbled in a slack-footed circle with the movements of a man 10 times his age, eyes following the line of the escarpment against the fading sky. "The light is going," he said. There had been no sun in the sky, yet the fight had been lit brightly as full day. Now that this place's magic was obliterated, its secondary enchantments would fade also. "We have time," Elora assured him. "And then what?" Elora looked up at him, as did Corey, both struck by his uncharacteristically bleak tone. "They were dying, Thorn," Elora said, and Thorn shook his head. Every fool knew dragons were eternal as the world. That's why they always stood first among the pantheon of great realms. It would have happened regardless, Elora continued, whether we came or not. Her gaze moved toward the peak that had served as perch for the lord of this host. Calendineer told me. Thorn knew the name, but now it was his turn for eyes to burn with tears, as he found no face in memory to match it. Again, he shook his head. They were our hopes and dreams, Elora. Dreams, perhaps, Drumheller, Corey interrupted, but the Danann is our hope. So spake prophecy. Every prophecy, mage, of every race we know. All the stories tell of a time of change, when the hearts and souls of the realms will be put to the test, and a sacred princess will stand forth as saviour, to lead the realms into a new era of peace and harmony. Thorn finished. He made a dismissive snort. Still on her knees, Elora worked close beside Corey. Even in the phantom light of the Caledra, Thorn could see how the resilience had fled from Corey's golden skin. The deceiver hurt you pretty badly, Elora told her. We won't leave you, Thorn said, discomforted by the realization that he didn't altogether trust Elora to say it for him. But as you are, Elora said, we can't afford to take you. Deceiver won't be giving up, that's for certain, agreed Corey. We've a long road back to Saint-Denis. Somewhere he'll be waiting. Which means, since you're the warrior, before we go, we have to make you better. What is happening? Thorn asked. What happens to the realm of dreams when the dreamers are no more? The fates willing, Elora said. We'll never have to learn. Elora reached into her pouch and drew forth a single gleaming egg, which she cradled in her lap. All living things have their span, Thorn, she said, and as she drew fingertips across the egg's surface, flickering coruscations of fire followed. It was of fair size, roughly equivalent to a daikini's head. The lines of flame Elora's touch brought started as a blend of scarlet and gold, but as the flames moved farther, they cast off ripples of lapis and rich purple that reminded Thorn of a summer sunset. Some, she continued, like the mayfly, last but a day. Others walk this waking world for years. But death, when it comes, doesn't always mean the end. From each generation comes the seed of its successor. As you were father to your children, as I am the child of my murdered parents. Even Corey here, the body of a warrior slain in ages past, had a mama and papa. She looked up from the egg, and her smile turned ineffably sad. Even dreams get old, Thorn. They need to be renewed, to speak to each race and generation in turn. That's why the Deceiver came, eh? Corey nodded, to dictate the shape of those dreams. And why he was able to breach their citadel, Elora said, because, real as they looked to us, they were no more than shadows. A truth, Thorn now realized, but not the whole truth. Elora was holding something back. It was something he'd never seen in her before, and gave off resonances of both the dragons and the Deceiver. Something happened here, he thought, that struck her so deeply she daren't acknowledge it. He kept his own counsel and said, Speaking of shadows, and emphasized the comment with a wave toward encroaching darkness. Spurred to action, Elora returned the egg to her pouch. Watch our back, Drumheller, she told him. Thorn snapped his fingers and, presto! In the palm of his hand, a ball of light appeared. A little showy, don't you think, Thorn? Corey commented. For later, perhaps not. The point is, magic is accepted to be the conscious manipulation of natural and unnatural forces. Summon a wind or a demon, it's much the same. Cast the proper spell, you'll get the proper result. Elora can't do that. By the same token, thankfully, she's also immune to the effects of those enchantments. Except when they're cast by the Deceiver, Corey added. During their first encounter, on the night of Elora's ascension when the girl was 13, the Deceiver attempted to assume dominion over her body. That attack failed, and with Thorn's help, Elora had escaped. But the city of Anguin, together with reigning monarchs of all 12 great realms, was encased in ice. As for Elora, her skin had turned purest silver. She laid one hand on the center of Corey's body, just below her breasts. The woman's heart was sound, but the beat of her pulse was slow, as though the muscle was too tired to continue. Healing the warrior wouldn't be much use if the result left her lame. The real damage, though, was within, and Elora suspected the deceiver had struck with poison spells to sap the body of strength, to infect Corey's soul. If nothing was done, she was doomed. The problem was, trying to save her might lead to Elora's infection by the same foul sorcery. Corey sensed the danger and gripped Elora's wrist. "Dannon, enough." "Elora," Thorn said, kneeling opposite her, "let me." "No." She leaned forward, laid palms against Corey's skin. The contact was a shock. It was hard to remember that while Corey's body was that of a woman in her prime, the soul that animated it wasn't much more than a child, given life by Thorn the same night the deceiver had tried to claim Elora's. She bent herself to the task, concentrating first on Corey's broken leg. She drew back a little into herself to take stock before making her next move, and that almost proved her undoing, as the infection ruining Corey's leg reared to strike at her. In that flash, it wound its own pattern tightly around Elora's own, and sent poison racing up her arm. The breath rushed out of her. She felt her blood begin to boil. Where human hearts pumped scarlet, hers suddenly cast forth molten, liquid gold, so hot it gave her skin a rose glow that mimicked the living flesh of her own race. She wanted to cry a warning to Thorn, but she couldn't. As the deceiver's poison raced to claim her soul, it ran full tilt into that awful storm of flame and was instantly consumed. Elora wasn't finished. As the infection had leaped from Corey's body to hers, so too did she now cast back her inner fire across that gulf, into the warrior. Corey's back arched, eyes staring. She cried out, that sound a warrior makes, summoning the last strength from the core of her being as she throws herself a final time into the fray. The infection the deceiver had cast forth into Corey was Elora's match, so determined, Elora feared it had a mind of its own. A spear of darkest shadow erupted from Corey's midsection to stab Elora through the heart. It pierced her body, but as it emerged from her back, the shadow exploded into flame, which instantly consumed the entire length of foulness. The silver fire rushed back along the course set out by the shadow spear, carrying Elora with it. She found herself in darkness, but the texture was different from the shadow that attacked her. This was an active, dynamic force that defied the laws that were the foundation of Elora's life. She recognized it as the part of Corey's spirit that came from her sire, the part of her that was demon. Then, the foundation Elora's fire had undermined at last gave way, and the entire darkness collapsed around her. It seemed to Elora that the world was composed of crystal, and that some terrible mallet had struck the perfect tone to shatter it to bits. Palisades crumbled on every side. Now, Elora fought, though she feared it was too late. There was an electric moment of contact, and then Elora found herself blinking, human eyes. The sight before her was a mountaintop citadel, breached and burning. The stench was burned flesh. About her, chaos. It was a battle, a victory. Her body wasn't hers. She wore Corey's skin in those ancient days when the warrior lived her first life. Somehow, the cataract had etched a pathway to the past, an age so distant that both events and people were more legend than history. This can't be, she thought. Corey was dead when Drumheller found her. Her soul had long since fled its casement. That's what he told me. Otherwise, he'd never have cast a spell of binding to join it with the demon child's essence. She was no more than a hollow vessel, stripped bare. But this is her body I'm wearing. These have to be her memories. The answer came quickly, with blinding logic. Think of where you are, Elora. In the realm of dreams, in the heart of imagination, with dragon's eggs in your pocket. Who knows what's possible? And she had to marvel then at the spirit of the woman whose life she now beheld. If these scenes were faint shades of the purest memories, there was a passion in Corey Bannerfin that even dragons would respect. Elora stood on a sloping plain below the fortress. Bodies were scattered thick as snow. Both sides had fought with the ferocity that had become the hallmark of this war. She strode across the field as if she owned it, taller than most, bareheaded so that everyone could see her face and know she survived. Her blades were sheathed, but that meant nothing. Her speed with them was as legendary as her skill. She could draw steel, slice blade through a foe's body, and return weapon to scabbard faster than sight could follow. She cared nothing for the warriors, their end was richly deserved, but this castle had been the prison for almost the whole race of dragons. Rather than see their captives rescued, the defenders saw them burn. For all their might, Corey's army could do no more than watch. A gust of wind staggered Elora, forced her into the grasp of passing comrades. She looked up to behold a dragon, executing a pinpoint turn almost on top of her. Air cracked like thunder as he bailed his wings for landing. He was a shadow on shadows as Elora recognized him. "Dinir!" she screamed, voice breaking as much as her heart. "I know," was his gentle reply. She didn't know if it was meant for her or for Corey. Within the Caledra, Elora bared her teeth. Both her and Corey's bows were drawn to fullest extent. Thorn, watching, feared their spines would break, but the trance was so deep, intervention would only make things worse. "I'm sorry," Elora said silently in her thoughts. "I should have known better how to save you." "I'm sorry," Corey said aloud in the Caledra. It had been her plan to try and rescue the dragons. "Their day was done," Callum Dinir told her. His head was level with hers. "What do you mean?" "A new age dawns, milady. New dreams must inspire it, as young blood must consecrate it." "That's not fair." "It's war," Callum replied. "Someone should have mentioned it would be so hard," was Corey's response. "Think of the cost, aye," the dragon said. "But never forget as well what's been accomplished. That's the miracle." In truth, that's precisely what it was, as a squad of sappers trudged along the line of battle. A rock Nelwyn led them, but close behind were 3 Daikini, dwarfed by ogres whose speciality was heavy lifting. There were also trolls and brownies to act as scouts. Fairies made the best messengers, provided the notes were not complicated. Fire drakes provided the raging heat for the furnaces, where the Nelwyns had forged their weapons. The Malavoy had preyed on all these races. Their only hope of throwing off that cruel yoke of oppression was through unity. All her life, Corey had heard the reasons why that wasn't possible. She'd fought from the start, but she was one sword against a legion. In the scheme of things, the threat she represented was less than insignificant. Asana, the High King, changed that. For Elora, Asana was a revelation. He was a barrel of a man. His hair was a true mane of gold, and while his features were no match for the unhuman beauty of the elf kings, there was a mark of character to them that brought out the best in people. He viewed his crown as a solemn covenant with his land and his people, to serve both. This lord of the Daikini had forged a grand alliance against the oppressor Malavoy. It was Corey Bannerfin, his warlord, who'd led it to victory. Flanking him were both his monarchs. "Bloody business!" growled the shorter king, voice rough as grinding stones. "Aye," agreed Asana. Only his eyes betrayed his true feelings, for they were haunted as her own. "But it's done, Beauregard." "It's a watchtower, Asana," was the other's retort. "The least of our objectives, and you see the price we paid for it?" "I know the butcher's bill was as thee, friend Beauregard," said the liege lord of the Greater Fairy. "Didst think 'twould be any different?" "You did your best, Corey," Asana told her from horseback. "It was a good plan." "They're only good, my lord," she replied, "when they succeed. Beauregard's right. The Malavoy never fought this hard before." "They've never faced defeat before." There was satisfaction in the High King's voice. "Knowing what that means," Corey said matter-of-factly, "they'll make us pay for it." "Find me another way, my lord," the Ard Rig told her sharply. "I'll gladly take it." He jerked the bridle from her grasp, wheeling his mount clear of her. Elora cast about herself for some herald of the day's break, but Calendineer blocked her view. She burned with the passion of Corey's memories. She found no way for her soul to gain a safe and stable purchase, as forces of tremendous power buffeted her every which way. She had to find an anchor for herself, and quickly, or her attempt to heal Corey would doom them both. She smelled pitch-coated torches and death. She counted a handful in head-high sconces along the wall. Elora thought she was standing, but didn't understand how solid land could roll beneath her feet like a deep ocean swell. In slow motion she moved. In slow motion she fell, so that it seemed an age before she struck the ground. Her face struck something soft. She felt a sudden blotch of wetness on her cheek, tasted copper on her lips, and groped reflexively for the blade she carried in belt and boot. They came away empty, and so she felt instead for the features of the body she'd stumbled on. A wail escaped as her fingertips found the touch of a familiar moustache, a crooked and broken nose, a scar riding outward from the crest of her left cheek. For that instant, mage sight locked her eyes into focus, and she saw the face of her second lieutenant. "Taliesin!" Elora cried, and Thorn started at the anguish in her voice. Corey's world wouldn't stop spinning. Try as she might, Elora could find no firm purchase for the anchor of her will. This storm couldn't be escaped, couldn't be fought, could not be overcome. She could only run before it, with tight hold on her own wits, and pray for whatever skills or strength was required to survive. Images bombarded her like volleys of thunderstones. Asana, her voice was crying out to him, but he made no reply. The look in his eyes, though, struck her to the quick. It was more sorrow than any soul should have to bear. She challenged him to meet her eyes, but he could not. He left her to her fate. A fortress, foul stone under foul sky. Spiked walls fit snugly into the crook of a saw-toothed range. There was only one approach, across a plain that was broad and deep with the residue of those who died there. This was the seat of the Malavoy power. She thought she would face death here. She was wrong. Sword in hand, she stumbled through the endless hallways. Every aspect of the fortress was designed to drive intruders mad. She was their greatest enemy become greatest prize, whom they hoped to turn into their greatest weapon. Elora lashed out with the obsidian blade she'd taken from the first Malavoy she'd slain. Each life she took stripped from her one more layer of her humanity. It was a price she willingly, eagerly paid. Images came in frantic quickstep to match the pulse beat of her racing heart, blazing bright enough to sear their image indelibly onto the canvas of her mind's eye, replaced one after the next before the scene could properly register. The Sanctum Tower, a room at the summit whose low ceiling warred with the expanse of the chamber itself, denying the space beyond its boundaries. Guardsmen ringed the sanctum's wall. A copy of the skylight was etched onto the shadowstone floor, and at each point of the star stood a Malavoy. They let her find this place, because this was where they'd wanted her all along. "Welcome," she heard in their voice. Her sword point sagged as she responded in kind to the courtesy of their greeting. She jerked it back en garde, and raked the warriors for someone to slay. They wisely kept their distance. "Embrace thy fate, warrior. Be one with us." These were creatures who'd hunted her race for sport, who'd made the world a slaughterhouse for Corey's people. Yet their offer struck a chord with her. Shadow without, shadow within, as something uncoiled from the pit of her soul, kin to what rippled and curled in the boundaries of the Malavoy circle. "Defy us not, warrior, for we have so much in common." Hate begets hate, she realized too late, as do cruelty and lust for blood. Have I fought my enemy so long and hard, only to become him? Elora thought. She found a crossroads in her mind, two doorways, and remembered the classic warrior's conundrum, the damsel or the death dog. One path led to glory, the other to damnation. She made her choice. She was in darkness. She was dying. There was no peace to her last moments. She was in such agony she couldn't draw breath to scream. She didn't understand how flesh could be so broken, yet still clings to life. Her lungs continued to pump, her heart to beat, her mind to observe. She didn't know where she was, but there was age to this place that put the Malavoy stronghold to shame. She'd struck her last blow, and her wolfish smile returned at the memory of Malavoy's screams. Then, the darkness before her moved. It twisted and flowed, malleable as mercury, shot through with reefs of violet and deepest purple. It thrummed with curiosity, in the presence of something wholly outside its experience. It was a whole catalogue of impossibilities, every aspect of its being a fierce and heartfelt denial of the natural order of everything. And when Corey's feverish thoughts came to that juncture, a wall of bleakest despair escaped her lips. It was a demon. It had come to claim her. She felt an echo then, so faint she assumed it was imagination, a siren call from the Malavoy. "Reach out to us, little lostling," she heard. "Thy time is not yet past. Thou canst still be saved." To her surprise, she wasn't tempted. In song and story, demons were portrayed as fiercely as the Malavoy. Indeed, it was said they were the one creature the Malavoy truly feared. Damned by one hand, she thought, damned by the other. Better, she decided, trying to speak aloud. The devil, I don't know. I've had my fill of those I've met. She felt no more. Stillness. Elora heard the bellows pant of her own breath. In measured cadence, felt a myriad of impressions, the thunder of her heart, the sizzling fire of blood flowing through her like the molten essence of the world. The fire wasn't only within her. Corey was glowing too, a pale reflection of Elora's own luminescence. However, the fires were fading in both of them. Her work was done, the infection destroyed, the deceiver's traps tripped and overcome. There was a dull ache in Elora's breast, left over from her wanderings through Corey's past. She offered the demon child a smile, and beheld in Corey's eyes a different quality than had been there before. Elora hadn't been alone in her journey. All that she saw and felt, her companion had relived too, and like Elora, been changed as a result. Elora felt a Nelwyn hand upon her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said, "that all you could do was watch." "Simple solution, silly girl. Don't do it again," Thorn told her. "No fear, old duffer. But it worked. We won. She's all right." "Glad I am to hear it, Elora Dannon. But there's no more time. We've got to go, now."